Were any of the people who said no? I know there was quite a lot of publicity when you did finally do the job. Any of the people who said no come up to you and say, well, maybe I should have done it? I don't know.
Yeah, naturally, there'll be people that will say that. And, I remember there was a guy who, right at the beginning, I approached him and said, look, let's work on this together. And the guy wasn't interested. But I think over the years, when he's seen this thing, how it turned out, he was like, look, I should have been involved. Now, I think for him, he felt it was something too big. We're trying to bite something too big for our size. And he just simply felt that, hey, just small fish in an ocean, or sardines in an ocean. We can't tackle this thing. We're too small, Yeah, good luck with it, but hey, this. So I think on another note, he thought maybe I was on a wild goose chase of some sort, and maybe I was overambitious. Yeah, overambitious is the word.
And eventually you got to the point where you did. How much competition was there to do this job? Because it's a massive task that you
no there was lots of competition and lots of horse trading as well, there were mainly 4 other strong entities that were going at this. But I think the advantage that we had over everything else, I had started working on this in 2008. And over 3 years, we had built critical mass, the team, and the resources to be able to deliver this. So by the time the opportunity came up, we came in very strong. Everybody just came in from a point to say, look, we're expressing interest that we may want to do this, but they didn't go all out. We went all out right from the start. We pitched the bar extremely high at the start. And I think everybody was now trying to play catch up. But as they were trying to play catch up, we were even setting the bar even higher.
And do you remember that day when they said yes? Do you remember that day when they said yes? Do you remember where you were on that day?
Oh, yeah. In fact, what they did, they called us to the regulators' offices, and there was a press conference, right? And they just said, because I think the companies, we were reduced to 2 finalists. So they called both of us to the commission, and they said, look, we're announcing the winner. We're not saying who it is. They started off, everyone was gathered there with the journalists, with cameras and whatever. And they were slowly outlining the process they went through, the auditors they involved, the consultants they involved. And then they said, finally, Chengetedza is the winner. And then our faces lit up, we're happy. And obviously the other guys had lots of, they were sad faces, they hadn't made the cut.
Really? And that day, that night, what did you do to celebrate?
Funny enough, I didn't do anything because, look, I was never an outgoing person. I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't go out. So, yeah, I just, I had a happy day, happy afternoon. We went for lunch to celebrate. We went for a nice lunch at a nice restaurant, and we all went home happy that evening.
So someone's asking online here, it's quite an interesting question for you. How do you define the difference between overambitious and just plain crazy? And how do you know when to step back, or maybe when to push harder? How do you make the difference?
Okay, so for me, I think there's nothing like being overambitious or crazy, because if you think about it, the people that changed this world were the crazy people. So there has to be an element of craziness. If there's no craziness, it's too small. So I always say the amount of effort it takes to develop a small idea is the same amount of effort it takes to develop a big idea.
Now, and then when you got started at electronic systems for the stock exchange, you invested 6 million. You raised 6 million to invest. Where did that money go, and how hard was the task?
Okay, so it happened progressively. I think we had about, we had 3 we achieved this through about 6 rounds of fundraising, right? Obviously, when we won the tender, the first part was to put the initial capital. I think the initial capital we had to put in was $100,000, right? And then we had to put in another $200,000 and another $200,000 after that. Then there were fights in the market because obviously when we're automating, there were some people that did not want us to automate. There were some people prepared to fight us because they were not the ones that bought this. And I think at that time, there was lots of bad blood between the stock exchange and the regulator because of legacy issues. And we were basically caught in the crossfire. So our project, although we won this in December 2010, it took us another 3.5 years before we actually operationalized this. So the first 3 rounds were to fund working capital and to solidify on contracts, leases, infrastructure required to make the business successful. And then we then, approached one of the banks to buy part of our equity. So we cashed out part of it, and part of it we used it for further rounds of funding. So when we then brought in this bank, we then brought in, before the bank, some institutional investors came on board. And I think now when we had secured the project and we had gotten the buy-in of stakeholders, they were prepared to fund. But before, when there was no cohesion and the market pulling in one direction, they were not prepared to fund. So we had the task of bringing the market together and making sure everybody is singing from the same hymn book before the institutions came on board. And the institutions provided the majority. I think of that 6 million, probably we used about 3 million of that in working capital. No, 2 million, 2.5 million in working capital. Another, the balance of that 3.5 to 4.5 million was what we used for buying the system, buying the hardware, the office equipment, office infrastructure, basically the majority of it was the technology investment.
Just give me a taste as well. I mean, how quickly was the change and how dramatic was it? All of a sudden, after generations, you suddenly got modern technology involved in trading stocks in Zimbabwe. Just give us a taste of it.
Okay, so we took a slow approach of, doing some trial runs with the market, and we did not want to take a big bang approach, because in many countries they took a big bang approach and they ended up with serious issues in the market and problems, reconciliation issues, system issues, because the date we went live, we started off with one counter. So we're having a manual and an automated environment running in parallel. And then we started to do it company by company, taking on a few companies at a time, automating slowly. And then in doing it that way, we identified the problems, we were able to quickly rectify them, and without any fundamental disruptions to the market. So we did it slowly and gradually so that we eased into the market rather than to just make people jump over quickly. So that helped us to have a smooth implementation with no problems.
And how did you get your revenue from this? I mean, presumably you took commission on each trade. You took
yes.
For data as well. You charge for that.
Yes.
Just give us an idea of how you did it, and also the amount of revenue you got in the first 2 years.
Okay, so I think the first 2 years, you see what happened was, first 2 years, were difficult in the sense that we're dematerializing slowly. We had a big overhead base and the revenue had not matched up. So it took us some time to get all the companies automated. I think in the first 2 years, we probably made $2 to $3 million of revenue. Yeah, that's what we made in the first 2 years, but we're not profitable. We posted a loss, and I think in the first 2 years, we had to call on more capital from the shareholders to keep the business alive.
And how long did it take you to start breaking even and then make a profit?
It took, I think 2014, it took about four years to break even. And then I think in the 6th year, that's when, 5th year, we made a profit, but no dividend. But 6th year, that's when we started to get dividends.
And before that time, what were the worst days you had, would you say, in this project? Just give me an idea.
The worst days for me was when we were spending money and we're not making enough revenue, you know, and we always knew what would happen. If we didn't make revenue, you know, the CEO at some stage would send a circular for an AGM to discuss a rights issue. And you knew you had to raise money to pump in the project. If you didn't, you'd get diluted. So those were I think that's what I dreaded the most.
And how did it work out when you went to those meetings?
You know, look, the business needed the money, and obviously we had institutional investors with deep pockets, but you know, unfortunately, some of us did not have the deep pockets that institutions had, you know, and it, yeah, I mean, it was difficult, man. You know, I managed to follow my rights in some instances. Some instances, I just didn't have the money and it just had to get diluted, you know. It was not a nice feeling, but at the same time, you knew it was necessary for the business to remain alive.
And what about costs? How did you keep your costs down during this project? It must have been a nightmare.
So I think in our years, the first 4 years before we reached break even, I think because we're not making enough revenue, it forced us to be efficient and to really streamline our operations to the bare minimum of what was necessary to make the business work. And even, I think then there were also some macroeconomic problems that Zimbabwe was having. So investor activity dwindled on the market. Foreign investors started cashing out and taking their money outside. There was no longer as much activity than, I think from 2013, Zimbabwe's economy plateaued, and then 2014, the economy started to decline. And that's the year that we opened doors and we're slowly dematerializing. So progressively, things were getting worse by the year.
So in all of this, talking about the market, someone's asking online here, what is the easiest to trade, the safest in Zimbabwe, shares or commodities, of which the country has many?
Look, that's a very subjective question, and I don't have a question and a direct answer to that, but I can answer it from a principles perspective to say we are all unique individuals with a unique risk appetite, and we know how much money we are prepared to risk to make money. Because whenever you make money, there's always a risk that's involved. You could very well make the money, you could lose the money.